Hey folks, Professor Finn here, and got tagged on a Facebook post regarding an article that popped up earlier in my timeline today, and I just kind of point clicked past it. But then said, hey, help me out. We have a situation going on. So what we're going to do is I'm going to look at the article to begin with, and then we're going to look at the Facebook post along with some of the comments that were made and what, caused the individual to kind of say, hey, throw me a bone here, help me out. So the first thing is anything we discuss when it comes to the current health situation in the United States is a very unique situation. My goal here is not to judge. My goal here is simply to kind of say, hey, this might be good, this might be bad. You're welcome to form your own opinions. So just be aware that this is just me commenting on a couple of different things. So the article in question has to do with bodies being stored in a U-Haul truck. And you can see here I've gone ahead and I've clicked on a couple of different things: Daily Mail, Reuters, New York Times, Miami Herald even posted on this earlier today. So when I tried to do the New York Times, it said I need to subscribe and I have to put in an email address, which I'm not going to do because I'm just not in the mood to give more places my identity. We're going to not let the Daily Mail do pop-ups on me. So I had looked through this a little bit previous, and they did a fairly good photo montage of all the stuff that's going on here. So what I want to do actually is I want to go to can't tell which one of these articles I like best. So we're going to go to Reuters just because Reuters is April 29th. So today's April 30th. This was written last night. Updated 6 hours ago, and it is 4 p.m. in the afternoon here in Miami, so chances are pretty good there was an update during today. It says the city of New York delivered a freezer truck to a funeral home on Wednesday after it was found to be storing dead bodies in unrefrigerated U-Haul vehicles. The eyewitness saw bodies in a U-Haul van and said 2 vans and a truck were parked outside the funeral home. ABC News reports about 100 bodies were stored in the vehicles. ABC did not identify the owner. It's not clear how long they'd been there, but we can probably safely assume they've been there for at least 24 hours. Because of if there's odors and all sorts of problems, we're going to say that they've been there at least 24 hours. Lots of things can influence how quickly human remains decompose, but fairly safe to assume that strong decomposition leaking through the back of a truck, probably 24 hours is a safe bet. Bodies were found because someone reported the smell. NYPD declined the comment. Department of Health could not be reached for comment. New York City has been at the epicenter of a global coronavirus pandemic, and the city's funeral homes have been overwhelmed. So are their hospitals, so are a lot of things. More than 18,000 people have died of COVID-19 in America's biggest city, which is interesting because I think one of the other articles said something like 13,000 or something. It might have been in this Daily Mail one. So one of the fun things are just the different numbers that are out there, and this has been pretty hard. Funeral homes say they are facing weeks-long backlogs to bury or cremate their dead, and that's where Reuters kind of ends. So a couple things we're going to assume, just for sake of argument, is we're going to count the number of people. We're going to assume that this 18,000 number is correct. I have no reason to say no. I have no reason to say yes. We're just going to assume that is correct, which is something I feel strongly about. You should never assume numbers to be correct in news articles just because. And we're going to assume that these deaths were started to be counted, say, the end of January. So we'll start with February, March, April. Now we're into May. So 3 months. This is indicating that just about 6,000 people per month have died. If we go look at the New York Post, let's see if there's anything fun going on here. Between 40 and 60 bodies were discovered, either stacked up in the U-Haul or inside. So not 100, about 40 or 60. So total of 100. Don't quite know what they mean by 40 and 60 bodies were discovered. So either it's 100, so it's 40 and 60 in each truck, or it's between 40 and 60. One thing that we can all agree on is this is fairly undignified, not the way to go. Funeral home told officers that bodies were supposed to be going to a crematorium, but its staff didn't come to pick them up. That's interesting. That would be interesting to me because that's the only time I think I've seen that in one of the articles. And in general, um, I would think that the funeral home would transport to the crematory. But again, that's just me. I don't know that for sure. Um, Then we have, let's look at the one I did look at before, which is the Daily Mail article. So as many as 50 corpses are being stored in each truck. So again, we're close to that $100 total number. The owner told city officials its freezer had stopped working. They were forced to use trucks as a storage while bodies awaited burial or cremation. So there's an important thing there is when did the freezer stop working? So once again, for those of you just tuning in who don't know anything more, I am a licensed funeral director here in the state of Florida. I am a certified safe operator through the Cremation Association of North America. I have cremated bodies, and both as my full-time job as a college professor in funeral service education at Miami-Dade College, as well as a practitioner, I've had to deal with freezers stop working. This is business as normal. This happens when you have a funeral home, that every so often something bad happens and the freezer stops working. So the first is, when did it stop? And what steps have been taken to fix it? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So your freezer stopped. Did you call someone? When were they coming out? That would be question number one that the regulatory agency up there needs to probably look at and say, what is going on? Lots of photos here, and I don't really care about lots of photos because I know what it's going to look like to clean out trucks like this. We've already seen that the city of New York has responded by sending refrigerated trucks to help them out. Some of them have been dropped. I know it's been, but this is crazy. It's sick. I see some sensationalism, some ridiculousness going on here because, no, there's no real statement to put that to base that. Show me a video of someone dropping something, and then maybe we'll talk about it. But okay, sure, you saw someone drop some of the bodies. Who was it? Was it a state employee? Was it a funeral home personnel? Who was it? No criminal charges were brought to funeral, but was cited for failing to control the odors. That's quite common. We don't know if they've committed a crime, but certainly might be some issues here. So 15 of the okay. There's another 30 or 40 inside the building, so that's great. The funeral home is overcapacitated with human remains, and that is true, said Dr. David Penapint. He was the subject of a write-up last week, doing an excellent job with thing that he is doing where he is driving decedents across state lines and coordinating with funeral homes to get people cremated in outlying states. When I teach part-time at the State University of New York at Canton, David is my boss, and I do know him. He's a good peer, and he's a good friend. So nice to see him involved here because I know what he's there for. He's probably there to try to get some of these people cremated. And I'm sure he's there with his Helping Hands service that he is offering, that is being offered, I believe, at no cost to the actual funeral homes. Any of the costs associated with what he is doing is being borne by the New York State Funeral Directors Association. So we do know that the New York State Funeral Directors Association is taking measures and steps to make sure that things are handled in a good manner. So you don't disrespect the dead that way. Mr. DiPietro and I are in agreement. According to the post, funeral the bodies will go to the crematorium, but nobody come to collect them. Well, again, not surprising. Funeral, yeah. Freezer's broken. We get it. She was forced to obtain freezer trucks this month to temporarily hold bodies as funeral home reached capacity with no space remained. Yep, we know about that. That's nothing new there. So really, this article starts really just going down the rabbit hole with all the issues. It's not just about the funeral home. It's about a lot of the problems that are coming up there. Seen bodies stacked on top of one another inside the trucks with both doors open, said someone else. Again, they could be on racks. They could not be. They've been storing bodies in trucks, been going since the beginning of COVID. These people have passed. There's no way they should be treated. Well, that's interesting. When did the COVID start? That would indicate that the freezer's been broken for a while, and they've taken no steps to fix it. So that could likely land them in some serious hot water. New York Funeral Directors Association, person's not a member. And that doesn't mean anything, folks. I'm just going to flat out say that there are plenty of funeral homes that are not members of their state or national organizations. And even if you are a member of your state or national organization, doesn't mean you do your job well. It just means you pay a membership fee. So that doesn't help. City says freeze trucks can keep human remains frozen for up to a year. Okay. So yeah, this was the article that had some different numbers in there. So the last article we saw said 18,000 people have died. New York City's death toll here is now 13,000 with 160,000 cases. So, a little bit less than a 10% mortality rate if we assume each and every person under that this number is brought into died of COVID-19 related complications. So that's a hefty margin of change. 6,000 people, that's a lot. I mean, you're saying between 4,000 and 6,000 people per month are dying of this thing. Nearly half a million of someone who has died of coronavirus, new poll find that's great, whatever. I don't see how that is even pertinent or relevant. Total 1 in 3 people across New York State know of a fatality of the outbreak. And again, I know people that have been affected by it. I know at least one person, her family member has passed away from it. This is affecting everyone. We know this. I'm not sure why that even needs to be in this article, but okay. And if anyone wants to, call me and say, you're being so insensitive, I am critical of media in general because this is what they do. This really has nothing to do with anything more than they're overwhelmed, and everyone is being affected because it is a pandemic. And there are probably many reasons as to why the numbers are what they are. So the first thing that is very important is you should not be storing bodies in U-Hauls like this. That is inappropriate. And the next question then becomes, whose responsibility is it? So let's go ahead and look at the Facebook post. And I have copy and pasted this into Microsoft Word because I did not reach out to them to say, hey, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to be honest, I'm just far too lazy to have to blur, people's names out and all that sort of stuff. So I'm just going to copy and paste. The people involved know who they are. And if you go searching on Facebook, you'll likely find who it is you need to find. But so it's just a little rant for today. I'm tired of seeing people blame funeral homes for the pileup of bodies in New York City and elsewhere, especially after that article yesterday about bodies being left unrefrigerated in Brooklyn, which is the articles that likely is being referenced here because there was no article posted, as you can see, in the original post on this person's timeline. Do people really understand what's going on? Well, many other parts of the U.S. are looking to open up. Thousands of people are dead in New York. Okay, well, that's been confirmed by the paper. Any number between 12,000 on the low end and 18,000 on the high end. Clearly, that's a lot. So my first commentary is, what is a normal number of people dying per month in New York City? It clearly is not 3,000 to 4,000. So that's the first question we have to ask ourselves, because that will build into something later. Funeral homes are not equipped to handle this load because we don't know what a normal death capacity is. No one has actually reported that I'm aware of. And if someone has, please feel free to tag me in a comment below with posting an article that says what the normal death rate is in New York State, New York City, so we can do an apples to apples comparison of how much and how big things have risen. Crematories are not equipped to handle this load. Now, there's an interesting point we're going to get into. Hospitals are not equipped to handle this load. Again, absolutely true. We don't know. No one's really saying what the numbers are that they can normally handle in general. So that would be a very important piece of data to create a plan by which this will not happen again in the future. So no bodies are piling up in crematories and cemeteries more than 3 weeks behind. Please tell me how funeral homes are supposed to keep up. And of course, when you poke the sleeping bear, bad things happen. So this turned into a ridiculous thing on this person's Facebook. So the first thing I want to bring up is one thing that I think is probably the most egregious. And to prove that I am not making something up or doctoring a page, what we're going to do is we're going to add a tab here. I'm just going to go ahead and close this. And we're going to type in total number of crematoriums in New York. You can see I misspelled it the first time. And here is the link that I have clicked on before. And just so you can see, we're just going to go here, go here, go here, go here. It's the same link. I had it pulled up so that I wanted it ready when we talk about it. And I think what is probably most concerning to me here is underneath, are all crematories in New York State regulated by the state? It says, yes, however, of the 50 active crematories, 45 are operated by not-for-profit corporations, 4 are operated by municipalities, and 1 is operated by a religious organization. So I have a hard time personally accepting that the state of New York, one of the most populous states, one of the most integral states to the health, especially the economic health of the United States, doesn't have more than 50 active crematories. Now, with these active crematories, we can probably make some safe assumptions. None of them have 10 to 15 actual cremation retorts. They are licensing specific facilities. So there are no more than 50 facilities. And it may be safe to assume that the least number that many of these facilities have is 1 cremation retort capable of handling human remains. And maybe some of them have between 3, maybe even 5, depending on their size and what their intent is. So overwhelmingly, at the lowest end of the spectrum, we can probably safely assume there are between 50 on the low end if every one of these only had 1 cremation retort. And to keep with a conservative number, no more than 3 retorts per crematory, so 150. 150 actual retorts in use in New York City. So it has to be some number between 50 and 150, depending on which ones are down for maintenance or whatever any one given day. And the reason why this is important is, as I've stated, I've cremated bodies, I teach the subject, I understand the science behind it, and there are limitations when it comes to cremation. The most important limitation is the number of cremations that can be done safely in a day. The size of a body matters, especially the composition. Is the person more muscular? Are they more obese? Because muscle and fat tissue burn differently. And the second thing is the container. The type of container they're being cremated in also creates complications with how many you can do a day. And as a general statement, people that are obese take more time to cremate because during the process of cremation, they are being reduced to, the fat is being reduced to oil, and oil burns very, very, very hot. And so when you are cremating persons with lots of body fat, you have to take into consideration that these hot spots need to be monitored, and you have to do certain things to keep the unit safe so that you do not have a flame out or a catastrophic failure of the machine, which could result in the incineration of the building. That is something that is very important to the science. The second thing is the container these individuals are being cremated in. If you are having containers such as actual wooden caskets, those take more time to cremate because if they are not cremated properly, then the wood actually forms charcoal. And when you are processing the cremated remains post-cremation into the cremated remains that will go into the family's urn, they will generally be, dark gray or even black because of the amount of charcoal. So all these things take up time, and when you take up time, it takes out the number of things you can do in a day. Furthermore, on top of that, only a certain number of cremations can be done safely because the way the retorts are engineered, even the most efficient ones, there has to be a cool down period. So you will have a differing number of how much you can accomplish in a day depending on the type of unit, the type of people you're cremating, the type of containers they're in. This is something that is fairly complex. It's not rocket science, but some thought has to go into this, because if it doesn't, you can have a catastrophic failure of your cremation retort, and you risk death and injury of the personnel. And then if you have a catastrophic failure that consumes the facility, you have now lost that facility to be able to process things. So 50 crematories seems to be like a low number. So I would hazard that if there is a reason why this number is so small, that needs to be visited, and that needs to be discussed at the state level. So that is my primary concern as to, if you're wondering why there's like a 6 to 8 week backlog on cremations, there you go. That is very pertinent to the discussion as to why it takes so long for cremation. Now, burials could be different. I will state that. Right now, they are using a variety of tools to try to meet the demand. So if we go back to our our web browser and we type in New York, Hart's Island, what they have been doing is they have been and here's a I don't mean to click on National Review, but I saw the picture and this is probably the picture I want to look at, is they show something like this. So let's understand what Hart Island is. Hart Island is the Potter's Field. It is where people that are unclaimed or indigent with no known family members are placed to rest. And this is the standard procedure for placing indigents at rest in mass quantities. They dig a large trench, they put people in there, and this is kind of business as normal. So early on, I believe what the state of New York did is they said, if you cannot claim the person and dispose of them in an appropriate amount of time, then we are going to temporarily dispose of them at Hart's Island and we can figure it out later, which is the common protocols that are used when you have a mass casualty event. Identify everyone, create a registration system so you know where everyone is, so that if someone does come forward to claim them, you can. But this allows you to maintain a high level of public sanitation and hygiene so that you don't have more of a problem of like people storing bodies in U-Hauls in front of their establishments. But this obviously concerns people because of the stigma. Oh my God, they're going to the Potter's Field. They're going to go out there with all the bums. We can't have that. I understand that. I certainly understand that. But when you have a unique situation like we have right now, this is the result. So I don't think, they're dressed in PPEs, but realistically, I don't think that this is any more different at Hart's Island than it has been. This is how they dispose of the large amounts of bodies all at once. And if someone wants to go ahead and, comment about that below, by all means, try to get some video for me that says, they're doing something different now than they have done in the past, because I'm sure they dispose of a lot of people every year at the Potter's Field. But fact of the matter is, this is what the city has done. How is this compounded? I'm not going to dig up the article. I'm going to encourage you to go find it. But there was a statement made, and I'm sure you can either find it through the governor's office or Mayor Bill de Blasio's office or someone's tweets, that the coroner's office went from a 30-day pickup before we dispose of in the Potter's Field to 14 days. So when you lower the number by 2 weeks, it creates something of a panic, or vice versa. They've gone from 14 days to 30 days, but I doubt that would be the case because of the fact that they are needing to get people disposed of as quickly as possible because there are so many people apparently dying. So again, this is a perfect storm of different issues that are causing different problems. Do not believe that this is business as normal. This is what happens in extraordinary times. So let's go back to what goes on. So that was the original rant. And as you can imagine, people started going into it. So just to keep things clear, again, I didn't pick everything out because it was a firestorm of fun. And I didn't edit things unless I said I'm editing things. The first thing is, where is Dmort? Isn't this considered a disaster? So yes, it is considered a disaster. I am not aware Dmort has been activated on a full basis, but there are some problems with the idea of let's activate Dmort and Dmort is going to solve all the problems. They're not going to bring water to the dunes of Arrakis. What does Dmort do? Dmort, essentially, to put in the vernacular, bags in tags. Well, the National Funeral Directors Association put out a call for volunteers to help go up and do these sort of things. And there's a reason for that. And this is a very plain reason that I have stated during an interview I had last week with another party, is if I come up and help, there's now one less funeral director and embalmer in the state of Florida. And if I get sick up in New York, I am 2 weeks self-quarantined before I am back in action with the most favorable, possible outcome. So you would be depriving other areas of the country with their trained personnel. And normally, this is not an issue because whatever is happening is isolated to a certain area. When the hurricane came through and devastated Louisiana, we went to Louisiana and we helped because the hurricane did not destroy the entire eastern seaboard of the United States in the process of going to Louisiana. And that is just the reality of the situation. You are dealing with something that is unique, and not just unique in regards to it affects the United States. It is affecting literally everywhere. Everyone is dealing with this. Now, there are some strong feelings on this, whether it could be a manufactured crisis or misinformation, and we're not going to delve into that, but I do believe, in all fairness, I have to bring that up, that whether you deny the fact that, or whether you go with, one camp or the other, there is still a crisis going on. Something is not business as normal. And as a result, this can't be dealt with business as normal. So likely activating Dmort is not going to do anything, because Dmort, bags and tags, identifies and links remains back with their loved ones. The second thing Dmort can do, and this could be effective, is Dmort provides embalming services. They go there, they preserve so that there's more time so people can make a positive identification. They help with processing identification. They don't help with really finding ways for disposal. They provide the manpower so existing facilities can, run more efficiently, but they're not cremating. I'm not aware of a single mobile cremation unit. And if you are, feel free to drop a comment below with a link to that, because that would be pretty cool. That would actually be pretty cool. Cremation units are extremely expensive and they take time to build, so you cannot rapidly create cremation units overnight. So not surprising, Dmort hasn't been fully activated. Now, what may be a more effective solution is temporarily funeral homes embalm all bodies coming in under their care, unless the family opts out. The caveat being that they do not charge for the embalming. That might be something that is an option. I know of one funeral home here in the Broward County, Florida, that their base business model is any human remains that come into their care is embalmed unless the family says no. And there is no extra charge for embalming. That is built into their basic services fees. And when the family opts out, they don't save anything. It's built into the basic services fees. So if extraordinary measures must be taken where you must store bodies in non-traditional ways, that the body is at least preserved so that you're not having the byproducts of decomposition and putrefaction going into the streets and creating, if not an immediate health hazard, an apparent health hazard. Because certainly those trucks are now contaminated and lots of problems could come out of that. So maybe sending more embalmers could work. But even then, depending on the number of people that are passing away, we will say, as a licensed embalmer, on the quickest days, I could probably knock something out in about maybe 45 minutes. And I really can't guarantee that I've done a good job doing that. And there is a lot of public opinion, or a lot of professional opinion, as to what's good and what's bad. But I feel absolutely safe in saying that a reasonably skilled embalmer can do a very good job in an hour and 15 minutes on an uncomplicated case. And that is start to finish. There's really no reason to go any more than an hour and a half or an hour, 15 minutes, if all you're trying to do is get the body preserved, especially without considerations for actual viewing. You're just doing this to get this done. You should be able to get this done fairly quickly and efficiently. And if you actually set up something of a bucket brigade, you may have certain individuals just doing certain things. So the only really time-consuming thing that's going on is the actual injection procedure, but not the primary disinfection or things like that. You have stations set up. So you may be able to do something like that. And I think that would be something that people should look into, is simply changing their business model and embalming everything. But at best, even at 1 hour, just to make the math easy, the most you can do is 1 per hour. Well, that's 8 per day. And if people are dying 30 or 40 per day, well, maybe you can run embalmers around the clock with volunteers, so you're doing 24 a day, but that seems to be a bit excessive. That's going to be hard to do for every funeral home in New York. But it is an option where at least if half of them are embalmed, at least the embalmed ones can go into unrefrigerated storage, and the Unembalmed remains can stay in refrigeration until they are, or have religious opposition or other reasons why they can't be embalmed. So that might be a solution. Again, I am just here to comment that this is something viable that maybe they'll be able to look into. Most with the article say they were trying to help because other places turned them away. Well, you have to understand your own limitations. And I agree with this. They knew they didn't have the facilities to store the bodies, but took on the work anyways, knowing that there's going to be a backlog. They should have declared they are overwhelmed and gotten in touch with public health to find out what could be done. And I generally will agree with that there needs to be something that public health could do. And we saw that there was. They brought refrigerated trucks to help out. So that comment is probably right where it needs to be. I know I'm not scoffing anyone because I know it could happen to us down south, but every region needs to be prepared. Preach it, Pastor. Because we don't have a lot of facilities, and this is the absolute truth. Some funeral homes may only have a 3 or 4 person morgue. Some other larger ones may be able to hold more. The funeral home I started at, we could probably fit comfortably 12 people. Or I shouldn't say comfortable, we could probably fit at an absolute maximum 12 individuals in containers in that morgue. When my funeral home was purchased by a larger family-owned funeral home that among their now total 5 chapels, I believe it is, they can probably fit anywhere between 40 and 60 individuals in their morgue comfortably. If they needed to, bring the number up some, they could probably do that. But those are the exceptions to the rules. You're not going to find people with large morgues that are going to hold, 100 plus bodies. That is not something the private businesses have the ability to do. But not every funeral facility out there is a full-service funeral home, and you do have other places that do offer, storage services. But I'm sure they're overwhelmed too. Processing bodies be buried. They're not a public or government body. It's not a public service. They're getting paid. And that's important to understand. And I tell this to my students in class. We are a private business. People say, funeral homes never go out of business. Oh, they absolutely do. And they do so on a fairly frequent and regular basis, especially when they are mismanaged or the death rate gets too low. Just because a lot of people die doesn't mean it's profitable. And unfortunately, overhead is overhead, and you have to be able to meet your expenses. So it is a private business generally that is doing a public service. So this business is overwhelmed, but they're still paying for it. So there may be contractual obligations by which, they have to provide a dignified disposal and storage period and disposal of the people they're working for. It's kind of implied with what we do. There are various other civil suits that could be brought by individuals that are affected by this. You got to know when to say no. You have to know when to say no. The problem is in the environment that we're in, folks. When do we say no? When do we tap out, admit defeat? Those sort of things, come into play. It's a nearly impossible thing they have to live with up there. And I'll, throw some closing comments on that here shortly. You think this is all processing. Who do you have to prep the bodies? They don't prep themselves, Who does the paperwork? If funeral homes have the body and the paperwork is complete, but the crematory cemeteries can't accommodate them, please tell me what the funeral home should do. That's the $1,000,000 question. When the funeral home does their job and everyone else can't, what should the funeral home do? So the first thing is there are limitations to cremation, how many you can do per day safely. And even if you extend the shift from, 8 hours to 10 hours, you still have to have cool down time. So your crematories are not going to be able to pick up a lot of slack. You're not going to have a drastic impact there. However, cemeteries are a different story. If the ground isn't frozen, if the ground isn't soaking wet, you can pretty much bury as much as you can within the confines of the available equipment and people that you have, which means that if you are running Monday through Friday, business is normal, you have a problem. Now, no one has stated one or the other. If someone has, by all means, please, throw a comment down in the comments saying, hey, here's a cemetery that is doing 12 hours a day, or here's a cemetery that's only doing, business hours, start at 8, end at 3. Those are the things we need to ask. Are cemeteries doing anything to extend their hours or offer incentives to get things done, maybe free opening and closings, and I'm certainly not telling anyone how to run their business. But we can bury people a lot quicker than we can cremate them, especially when there's only 50 crematories in the state of New York. Could the state government activate National Guardsmen, bringing excavators so that they can bury back to back? Maybe, the cemetery only has a skeleton crew at the moment of maybe 3 or 4 people and 1 excavator. But if you bring in the National Guard, now you have 2 more excavators in full crews to man them. You can go probably from a burial capacity of 5 or 6 per day to 15 to 16 per day. And it's not going to make a tremendous impact immediately, but that extra 10 per day will certainly help down the numbers, especially if you can do that at multiple cemeteries. So that's probably one thing that I would suggest. If people die, don't the funeral homes have to remove the bodies? Absolutely not. The funeral homes are a private business, and they're not under an obligation to do anything for anyone until they've entered into some sort of even quasi-contractual capacity. One of the textbooks says that when a family leaves the name of a funeral home with the facility where the person passes away at, and the funeral home receives the call, we're under a contractual capacity to go pick them up. It's kind of an implied contract. And, well, that's kind of a problem. I don't think, and again, I am not an attorney. I'm not a practicing attorney. While I do have a rudimentary legal background, I am not giving any legal advice. I'm hypothesizing that on the basic principles of an offer and acceptance, if someone leaves my name with someone and says, hey, call them when something happens, and that person calls me, I don't think I'm under an affirmative, just in general with no prior contracts or anything, the most simple type of fact pattern that I know nothing about this. I've never worked with a family before, but if someone calls me and says, hey, come get this person who's passed away, the family gave us your name, I don't believe that I am under a contract to go get that body. That kind of defeats, maybe there's an implied offer there, but certainly if I go and then I respond, that we can probably talk about contractual capacity, because the action would imply, acceptance or something like that. So that much I would actually buy into. But, us being forced to go remove a body, no. And in fact, we could probably own a funeral home that has a contract with a transport service that does the transfers for us. There are reasons why you wouldn't want that, but you're not the one actually doing it. How many hospitals have morgues? And that's an excellent question. I think most people will be shocked that, 300 or 400 bed hospitals might have a morgue that fits 2 people. And they rely on the funeral homes for the storage. So that's an important question to ask, is how many hospitals are able to store remains, and how many can they store? How many can the ME accommodate, or the coroner's office? Certainly, how long must they accommodate for? We know that's the issue with Hart Island, is that the coroner's office said, hey, after this amount of time, they're going to go there, and then you can sort it out later when this is over, and we'll figure it out. So we know that the coroner has said that you have a certain amount of time, and we're sorry, but, we have to do things too. And how many refrigerated trucks have been made available for use? Excellent questions. And I'm sure that there are a lot of refrigerated trucks that have been made available for use, especially for the hospitals. Maybe not so much for the funeral homes, but certainly for the hospitals and probably for the coroner's office. Here in Miami-Dade County, Florida, we saw that in anticipation of bad things happening, refrigerated trucks started showing up at the Miami-Dade Medical Examiner's office. And that's not to say that Dr. Lee down there is anticipating, 60, 70,000 deaths, but she is a smart pathologist and knows that, hey, we better get 1 or 2 here in case things go south, and then we can figure it out from there. So at least we have some type of contingency. Also, on top of all the work they had before, they have thousands upon thousands more. Now there's a kicker here. Again, if you can find some references for me, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. What is the usual death rate from during this, just an average? What is the normal death rate in New York State and New York City? So by the most conservative number we've seen in an article, about 12,300 people. That implies if we're going to say start of COVID, end of COVID, or at least till, start of COVID until right now, that's 3 months. And we're looking between, 3,000, 3,500 people dying per month. If we look at the 18,000, it's up to 6. Well, notice in both of those, it just says this is how many people have died, either implying that these are COVID only or a total number. And we do see, whether we want to admit this or not, we do see lots of different agencies reporting that if they die during this time or they die in this place, you're going to put COVID on there, you're not going to put COVID on there, which creates problems with the numbers. So we have to look at the actual number of how many people normally die during this period in whatever area. And how much of an increase, how much of a deviation do we have from that normal number to where the number is now? Because of the fact, this has always been a reality. And this is something that finally people are getting the veil lifted from their eyes, that this was always a possibility. I mentioned to someone in an interview that, it's only been really our hubris as a first world country in most first world countries that has prevented us from accepting that we are still very much susceptible to disease. We've gotten much better with public health and sanitation, so we reduced the frequency by which we have catastrophic disease events. But it just takes one simple bug to create a problem. So if, for instance, on a normal month, 1,700 people die in, and we will say for the sake of argument, the numbers they were reporting in the articles were statewide. If 1,700 people die in a month, normally, and now we're at 3,000, and the infrastructure can't handle that, that is a very important conversation that state needs to have, is how do we create an infrastructure so if we have a 100% increase, we can handle this. If you normally have 2,500 people die in a month and 3,000 people die, it's an increase, but not terribly significant. From 2,500 to 3,000, that's a bad year. If it's 5,000 to 6,000, that's a significant number, but still not as bad as, say, 1,700 to 6,000. So there needs to be some very frank and transparent conversations as to what is happening, because these are the things that all states now need to look at and have a contingency plan. If something like this happens, can we take public areas such as ice skating rinks, hockey rinks, which there are, hundreds of hockey rinks here in Florida, but at least up in New York, maybe you'll be able to convert this to cold storage temporarily to help alleviate some of the problems, like you would do in another mass casualty event. So there needs to be some very frank and some very open conversations, and not a whole hell of a lot of finger pointing, which I think is going to be a problem, because everyone, especially during the election year, is going to want to blame someone for their misfortune. And the truth is, everyone is wanting to armchair quarterback based on what they know in the moment rather than what they knew at the time. Certainly, if we would have known a pandemic was coming, we would have, constructed more facilities to build more face masks, constructed hundreds, if not thousands, more refrigerated truck storage, etc. But fact of the matter is, what can we do now? We need to reflect on why certain things are. Why are there only 50 crematories in all of New York State? Is it a restriction? Is it because there's a limited number of licenses? Is it because the cremation rate is naturally low? Is it being artificially manipulated to keep the cremation rate low so that people will go for traditional funerals? What is going on so that we can have an infrastructure support the issue? Everyone is working overtime, and it is awful that people are trying to blame funeral professionals for what is happening with the pileup of bodies. And I'm not going to say that funeral directors don't get the fuzzy end of the lollipop. We do. That's kind of implied in a lot of things that happen. Just like anytime someone screws up, that means we all do the same exact thing. If the facilities aren't there, they just aren't, and that's the truth, that no one is prepared for this. The larger question is, how much more of an increase is there actually going to be? We're not going to know this probably for some time, because even though we can compare regular numbers, that part is going to be easy. the 1,700 versus 6,000. If we say everything is COVID related, well, that's kind of a problem if we're just going to compare, 6,000 people popping up with a disease they may or may not have died from, which is something that people have been very critical of, especially in independent media. And that's why we have to really isolate actual numbers. People who have died, how much of an increase was it? Why can't we handle that? What are ways we can? Even Dmort is in New York City, and there are people who have been recruited from across the U.S. So again, I don't know if Dmort is there. And if Dmort is there, the most Dmort is going to be doing is, again, identifying and tracking, maybe embalming, but they're not likely going to be disposing. That's just, it's going to be past that. And the people that are going up to volunteering, they're transporting, they're helping out, but it doesn't increase the infrastructure. So if we were to assume the best case scenario up there, the New York State infrastructure is overwhelmed. Definitively, it is overwhelmed. And being something of a quote-unquote legal scholar, and I use that term very loosely, I have to ask myself, is that a national problem or a state problem? And it is a state problem, and it is a New York City problem. So we then start having the larger question of how much should the federal government step in to help people, help those governments handle their problem? And why isn't it that they were not also considering, could this happen? Is it the responsibility of the federal U.S. government to make sure that the states are doing their job, quote unquote? And of course, that's kind of a problem because the federal government really can't step in with direct oversight that you need to manage your state well, or we're going to take that power away. Unless something is violating a U.S. law or the U.S. Constitution, the federal government stays the hell out of state affairs. That's the whole premise of our nation. Sorting through the hyperbole, sorting through the blame, there are some very important questions that need to be answered. And they should not be answered by the federal government. They need to be answered by the governments of the state of New York, as well as the municipal government of the city of New York. Identify what the infrastructure issues are, and then put plans into place to fix that. So this is the best that I can do to help out the author of the comment that prompted the current celebration of commentary. If there are other topics you'd like me to address, again, feel free to drop me a comment below, like, share, and subscribe. And again, I want to hear from you folks. Let me know if you think my cheese has slipped off my cracker, I'm a couple McNuggets short of a Happy Meal, or maybe I'm right on point here. So folks, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you next video.